I'm going to start in the wrong place because Dimetos has just been on. And it was, I think, the first and only production that I've stage managed. And what I remember about it, and because it defines my relation to, in a way, to theatre, is Athel came to me and we'd made him a bench. They needed a bench for Dimetos. I forget quite the format of the bench, but they needed a bench. And he said, "This bench has no reality." And in my head I was going, bloody right, it's a prop. Because I don't come from, the theatre world. That's not my background, as you know. I didn't go to drama school, none of that. So I think that's a salutary intro to me in the space, really. Vis-a-vis me in South Africa, I found it extraordinarily difficult because I was brought up in Lesotho, basically. And I remember the one teacher, Willie van der Walt, at school, his words of wisdom to me when I left school was, don't get caught up in that radicalism, hey? Which meant, watch the liberal consensus at an English-speaking university. And in a sense, I never did get caught up in it. I mean, my argument with, what's his name? Not Gerrit. You may not know. I think he's the current head of Michaelis.
Oh.
Gavin Young.
Oh, that was the other person.
Gavin Young.
And
yes, it would be. Gavin Young would be the person at your meeting.
And who was the lady with him, Gavin? And
he had a missus then, who's no longer his missus, but yeah.
Because she was also...
No, but Gavin invited all the sort of Cape Town artists to a weekend up on Sir Lowry's Pass, the top at a hotel. And the whole thing was about, you have to have an ideology. And I said, why? Yeah, because it seemed an entirely human thing to me, the problem in South Africa. And, whether you were a socialist, a Maoist, a whatever, is not going to make a blind bit of difference to what we were not coping with, was my take, really. And then to jump again, when we did Fatsy's play, the first South African, as a white South African, it was my fundamental education out of being a white South African. And there's the value of the space again. Because I worked directly, I'd worked with Toti and various people at the space, but when we did the first South African and we got to the first rehearsal, we cast it off the street and we had Nomclair and various people to act in it. But I knew I had to break down. I'm the white man and the cast were darker. And I said, to them, you have to be able to disagree with me. I'm not the boss. I am the director, but I'm not the boss. Because nie die boss. You know what I mean? I had to break that down. And I was enacting it for Julie the other day because of your phone call. And in the rehearsal, we just started and we were trying to talk, we were trying to address this, and I forget his name, but he was the shortest, youngest of the lads. Huh? Probably, yes. And he said, and I can't get up, but he got up and he said, "Dimitri," because the beautiful African way of speaking English. "Dimitri, are you telling me that I can tell you what I think about what you said? You must be joking, man." Which was, and I thought, oh, now what do we do? And it was brilliant because Nomclair said, do any of you guys know Nomclair? Nomclair is a huge individual and actually very powerful and quite intimidating. And she said, "Well, I suppose I better do it. What do I think of you?" And she said, God, it was cruel. She said, just like all South African liberals. So I said, why? And she said, well, when I was introduced to you, remember you were in the dark room? I was in Brian's dark room. I don't know what I was doing, but I was in the dark room. Brian brought her around and he introduced her. This is non-clear. You've cast her. And no. I said, hi, and I greeted her, you know. And she said, you pretended you liked me and you didn't even know me. A typical liberal. And then when people, and the rest of, particularly the guys, just watched like this to see, you know, what was my reaction. And I sort of went, yeah, it's probably true. Because I didn't know her. And we went from there. That was for personally, was my education. It truly took me out of all the set things, you know. I was anti-racist, but it didn't have any reality to it. But working with the cast, some of whom I grew to very fond of, others I was glad when I saw the last of them, as is normal in, you know, any human thing. You know, you like some people, you dislike others. It was real. And then I don't know if you remember, Rob Amato started this sort of arts magazine. Sketch, yeah. And he asked me to contribute. And what I did was I wrote about my experience doing the first South African. And in it I said that the problem with us white South African liberals is that we lived in what I called an irreality. You know, we had our opinions, we had our views, but basically we didn't, in a real way, have anything to do with black people, actually. Maybe marginally, and places like the Space you would have a more normal kind of, where you get pissed off with somebody. You say, why haven't you done that? Do you know what I mean? It would be real. Mainly the contact was at parties, you know what I mean? Hence Carol Barrack. That's where my thing with Carol Barrack comes. Anyhow. And I called it an irreality. And what Robert did, which I will never forgive him for, was he showed what I'd written to somebody else and published in the same article a pretty brutal attack on it. Basically on the basis of using the word irreality, that it was pretentious, it wasn't a real word, da. So that, I think, is my, that, you know, the politics of South Africa was about our incapacity to do much at all about anything. And very few of us were brave enough to go the whole hog, you know. And you know, when here, and this is what doing this interview has done to me, here, when I was first in England, it became obsessive. I'd say we are and always will be culpable. We didn't do effectively anything. And I stand by that view. We had our views, we didn't like it, we were opposed to it, and you know, the little things, and they were little things, you know, the Space happened, it was there, but, you know, and remember, when the new Space opened, I remember Totti was, for Endgame, Totti was stage manager, and Totti's mixed race, and she felt she had to go down to the marches up and down Adderley Street. Yeah? She had to sort of bear witness. She wasn't going to be part of the march. She wanted to just watch it. And the police were doing, they terrorized everybody, whether you were marching or not. They cleared everybody. And Totti got a whack, I think, on the side of the head. And she pitched up. It was dress rehearsal night for Endgame. And she pitched up. I think she had to go to hospital. But my first reaction was, Tati, what the f- do you think you're doing? We've got a dress rehearsal. Hello? Do you know what I mean? What, you know, even then, when we had to close the shutters on the new space, the windows, because the police vans were coming up, and out the back you could see the tear gas canisters arcing out. You know, but empty streets, and they just, because they terrorized. We sat, what did we do? We sat in the space, terrified. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my recall. And we did this we were putting on Endgame in that context, which was perfect in a way, wasn't it? You know. So, yeah, I'm happy to take on the fact that I wasn't brave enough to do anything substantive. But you know, who was it who was at the space who was sort of secretary, and her husband got locked up and she got sent back here?
Yeah, Sue Rabkin.
Sue Rabkin. Now what was his name?
David
Rabkin. When we did that show, Responses to Detention, he came and he did a brief interview with me, and he said, did you make any strictures about what people could show? I said, no. And he said, why not? I said, because then we wouldn't have been able to make the show in a pragmatic sense. And also, I wanted to know what the artists of Cape Town, by not contributing or contributing, whether they had anything to say. And the truth was, it was a good show. It was a good show to do, but I don't know. Can you remember a piece that really, you know, we didn't have a hell of a lot to say, quite frankly. I mean, mine was the piece I did. You remember I used the little video camera, and his name is gone, but he worked at the external studies part of UCT. And he and the guy who sits in Paris, the Afrikaans writer.
Oh,
Breitenbach,
yeah.
He and Breitenbach can be, you know, talking to one another, writing letters. James Polly. James Polly, remember? Yeah. James Polly and Breitenbach were having this, you know, and they were talking about changing the world and revolution, and actually Brayton was heading out to start the revolution. I mean, you know, he's a novelist or poet, I don't know. And but James was in South Africa. James Polly was in South Africa. Very earnest man, very bright, very concerned, very liberal. And they picked him up. And they put him away for, I think it was 3 times 90 days. You know? And he wasn't the same. Fucked. I mean, sorry. But it just did him. They didn't touch him. They just locked him up for, what is it, 3 9 to 27, 270 days, and completely, and from my point of view, he was not the same person.
No, he never was. No.
It's true, isn't it?
Yeah, it is true.
Yeah. And my piece was incredibly glib in a way, but as the only metaphor I had for it was, I framed it in the camera as if I was trapped by the frame of the picture, and I was kind of that was all I had to say, you know. So yeah, that's politically. Oh, and the other thing, Brian, you'll love this. Gardens, the last election, the last election that I voted in, I was living in the Gardens, I think, yes, and I voted what was it, Progressive Reform. And I think we got 17 or 37 votes in the whole constituency. And you thought, yeah, man. And it wasn't an Afrikaans constituency, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was university lecturers. It was, you know, all sorts of, basically, you know, Kevin Atkinson was living up the hill. We were all voting in Gardens, and only 17 of us. You know, come on.
Yeah.
Come on. And if you think of the Jewish community, the only place the Jewish vote took hold was Helen up in Houghton. And in Houghton they didn't have much to fear because they were a mainstay of the bleeding economy. Sorry, I mean that's not fair, but anyhow. So the other thing in South Africa was, I never forget, Britain, and you had the anti-apartheid movement, and old Sam had to give us special permission to do Endgame. But, I lived in Lesotho, hey? And my parents ran the hotel. And I remember the newly elected, or not elected, what do you do when you come to the throne? The newly,
crowned,
the new king, because it was like a monarchy, or there was a paramount chief or something, And he wanted to come from me at the hotel, and they allowed him to. And I was a kid. And it was the only time in all the years my parents ran the hotel that black people were ever in the dining room. English administration, and there are different kinds of apartheid. I mean, my parents were trade. So ourselves and the Stradoms, who ran the Stradom was an Afrikaans name for Julian, the Stradoms were the only two families in the entire village of probably 1,200 people who weren't allowed to join the club because we were trade. And we were kids until they found out my father has wonderful hands, and he made sets for their Amdram productions. And then we were allowed to become members of the club. And you see, it's apartheid by another name. And when I came to England, I'd never heard English like what it is spoken here because, Lesotho was solidly middle-class English, colonial administrators, virtually all of them. And so when I arrived at Harwich, I heard some poor German guy getting what for from a guy who worked on the docks. I'd never heard English like that. Never. And when I was living on Corfu, which was my route to England eventually, I was sitting there and I heard this young woman's voice behind me, and it was quite attractive and very nice, very English. And I turned around and it was pitch black. And as a South African, I went, because, to be honest, I was still a racist. I mean, I would never, if I'm honest, in a million years have thought that voice came out of a black face. Never. Never happened. And I remember when I landed in Europe, I saw somebody working in the fields. Women. First of all, a woman working in the fields. And she was bent over. She was, And then I realized she was white. I went, Bish. And I was a liberal white South African. Is that enough? About background.
Yeah, but could you just do a thing because we about the exhibition on responses to detention, because we sort of got in the middle.
Yes.
Just go back and say what it was about. Yeah.
Well, basically,
it
came. I've partly covered it already because I got the idea for the exhibition because James Polly was a friend, and he'd got me to go and give talks about photography up, in Montague and, outreach. So I'd done a couple of sort of evening talks, slideshows for him, and he'd been locked up. So like everything I did virtually, it had a personal base. And so my idea was, what is my reaction? What is everybody else's? And since I was part of the artistic community, sort of, or margin of it, that's where I got the idea. And you said, okay. You see, and that's the space. Where else? There was nowhere else you could. If I'd had that same idea, where would I have done it? I mean, I think this is an important point about the meaning of the space. I mean, can you think of anywhere, Bee? I can't think of anywhere, because certainly, I suppose if you were a student and was locked up, you know, you could, but you couldn't have a show. You couldn't have a public show. None of the commercial galleries would have gone near it. The Association of Arts would have gone, bye-bye, there goes our grant. It wasn't going to happen, but it was possible to happen at the space. And then the fantastic thing about the space was you had to walk through past the exhibition to get from the box office come restaurant into the theatre. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect, because there was no other way, was there? You walked through past, and if you were at all taken or interested, then you walked into it was just one space, you know. Oh, and there's a little room as well. But yeah, so that was, you know, and we didn't get any reviews. So the press, you know, there's a huge ambivalence, isn't there? I mean, you know, the Argus and the Times and whatever. We didn't get a word about that show. And, you know, I mean, even and Rabkin, David Rabkin, he could have written something, but he deemed it insufficiently pure, insufficiently radical, insufficiently whatever. But I remember the moment I gave him that answer, he put away his things and said, bye. So, you know, there were all these axes being ground every which way. So that was a memorable exhibition, really. I mean, and then of course, I don't know if Brian's aware of this, but the main artwork that I did, photography aside, not that I had many exhibitions, but I mean, I had one, do you remember, of Shelley and two other people. Your little interest to you as a cameraman was, it was the dilemma of when do you take a shot and what is significant was the question that was preoccupying me. So I asked Shelley, who at that time I was living with, and I asked Richard Wake's wife, and I think Nina was the third one actually. And I said, would you sit in a room within the take of the camera, and I will take a picture every 5 minutes, and you've got nothing to do. You're just there. And so every 5 minutes for 3 hours. Well, I had a Hasselblad, three rolls of film, 36 pictures, tick, tick, tick. And it was fascinating because you just got completely lost. And the pictures they were utterly real. There was no manipulation. It was a real situation, albeit set up. But and then I did my the scarf. What was it? N+1, I think I called it. Do you remember? It was a long sheet of plastic, and I got a bag of matchsticks, right, without heads on, and glue. And I glued these pieces, and I started laying out these matchsticks, thousands of them. I had about 30 yards of this thing, and I exhibited it in a roll with a bit sticking out, and you just saw, and the matchsticks obviously went all the way in. And then the subtitle was that this piece is completed with my demise. It was like a truly personally endless sculpture, because that was the other side of my personality. That's how I felt about things, you know. Tick, tick, you know. So, but the space, you know, nobody was going to buy it. It was a piece of plastic with matchsticks stuck on it. It wasn't aesthetic. The space let you do it because you weren't trying to make money out of, you know. I don't think even David Goldblatt sold a photograph from because we showed David Goldblatt, who's now a pretty big macher in the world of photography. One of his earliest shows, certainly in South Africa, and certainly it was the first show in Cape Town, big show about Soweto. Yeah, and then we did another one at the Old Space. And then, of course, this is very personal again, but this is where that's what you said to me anyhow. decided I might have the capacity to be a director, because I did performance art. And Brian actually shot a documentary. There's a remnant of it. Me in me underpants for my sins. And that was me trying to do, I suppose, it was the most overtly political thing I ever did as an artist, which and was called A Homage to the South of Africa, a dance with time. That's right, because we were stuck in it. And yeah, and Brian's the space was the only place I could ever have done it.
That was the second one.
It was the second one. I did one before then, yeah, which was called To Act ? So I had me obsessions. And you know what I did for To Act? There was an English director. Who was it? Ronald? How is it the guy you thought we might do the show with? What did you say his name is? Ronald, here in London. Donald Howard. Yes. He's an English director. Yeah. Well, he made the most fabulous comments, because To Act ? Was a very elaborate haircut, according to Donald. It was a British reaction to my first major performance art piece. Because what I did was, I gave each person a handful of Namibian desert sand, right? And then I had a set of poles, like a cathedral nave, red poles. And then each person was tied to a pole, and then tied to the person, so that they sort of, you had these white bindings holding each person. And then I went in, and there was like an altar piece up at the top, and a mirror. And what I did was I knelt in front of the mirror, and I had this hair down to my waist. And I went, and I cut it off in great big chunks. And it was like the idea, and I'll come to why I no longer do performance arts, but the idea was that you had to make a sacrifice. You had to act on yourself before you could act on anybody else. That was my idea. And so once I'd cut my hair and broken the glass, so I was no longer self-obsessed, I went and I cut everybody free. And I said, you can do with the sand what you wish. And I think one of the lads I think Alex would. But yeah, so To Act, and that I did at the Space. And the last one I did was called Amends. And Amends was where I sort of symbolically died. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You don't remember that one?
Yeah, which one was it? Because
this is the last one, the third one. Was there a fourth one?
No,
there was a third one.
There was the haircutting one, then there was the panes of glass,
yes.
and the oil on the floor.
Oh yeah, well, I didn't describe it because it's so the meaning. You see, I was obsessed with my meanings, and the Homage to the South of Africa. I painted the floor sky. Well, it was a dark sky blue, wasn't it? Bee? It was ultramarine, acrylic ultramarine blue. And then I got every light. I stole Brian's photography light. Every light I could get hold of, shining straight down. So it was a upside down world, really. That was my idea. The sky, too, is moving. To quote Bob Dylan. The sky, too, yeah, whatever. And then there was these sheets of glass and a metal pole, a curtain rail. And the idea of the piece was, you looked at all this through a pane of glass. That's your own mind. This is a translation. Nobody got this. There was a pane of glass, and I took this thing and I thought, okay, this is telling everybody this is my mind, okay? And I went, ding, 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 because the pane, it was a formal glass, hung almost transparently from the ceiling. Remember, you could hardly see what held it up, and there was so much light. And I sort of said, okay, this is the product of my mind. This is my mind. Mm-hmm. I got undressed first, didn't I?
That's right.
That's
Yeah.
right. I hung up all my clothes, and that was a huge mistake, because somehow people got the idea it was like there was a sort of cruciform quality to my coat, I think. I pinned up my coat. I hammered nails into them. And so my little denim jacket was pinned to the wall, but like this. And so people got crucifixion. End of. I don't know. Anyhow. And then I went from this, and then I went to the first sheet of glass. And I went, ding, 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 like for whom the bell tolled. And then went, and it just went, and Brian's got one fantastic picture where the pane is still there and the pole is poked through it. It's still a pane, it hasn't shattered yet, the point where he took the picture. And somebody said the most visceral response was that felt, it was some, I forget who it was, it might have been Gerrit's wife actually. She said it felt as if it took half an hour for the glass to finally stopped crashing to the floor. It sort of, everything slowed down. And then I went to the next glass and I broke all 4 panes. And my idea had been that I was going to swim through the glass. But my friend Paul Ashton, who's still in South Africa, is a psychiatrist now. He said, Dimitri, you won't get to the first sheet. Because it'll shred you. And so I said, but what I did was I threw olive oil. And it looked like pea though, didn't it? Because
and that
it was in
another
white.
big mistake, yeah.
Why was that?
Because you were going to drag that drum, remember?
No, hang on. The drum belongs to... Oh yeah, no it doesn't. Yeah. No, you're right, yes.
And you couldn't get traction on the
that's
ground,
right.
so you couldn't
yeah.
move the bloody
yes,
drum.
No, yes, that's right. Because I broke, that's right. You see, I couldn't remember anything. But and I had these, it was 2 liters of olive oil. They looked like big jugs. Huh? But it looked, it's yellow. And it looked like buckets of pea. Everybody said, we thought it was pea. So anyhow, I threw these things over each glass. And that's us. That's the human. The soft, the moisture, people, human, real, live. And then I went and I poured 2 over me, which was the fantastic. And then I put my hands behind my back, and Michi was singing, Michelle Maxwell. I said to her, Michi, I've got to get to the other end of the gallery. Sing me there, and then bring me back. Because on the way back I had to pull this big crate, which anyhow, and it was like being a fish. But the most unexpected thing, because it was only ever done once, the thing about these pieces was real time and only once, sort of existential, there's no repeat. You can't make a living out of it. But I swept some of the glass that had fallen over my track. I was a good boy, swept on the glass, and then I put my hands behind my back and I was covered in this of olive oil. And then I went like that, the length of the gallery. How long was the gallery? 50 feet?
Yeah.
About 50 feet. It felt like forever. But the sound it made was so sexual. Because I was sort of stuck to the floor and it was a credit to the people there that I didn't burst out laughing. And then anyhow, I dragged this big weight back, and then I gave up. And I symbolized giving up by going to the corner of the gallery and taking my mind and going, whack, and I chucked it in with all the other debris. Because my proposal was, what I thought I was saying, was we have to, it's our ideas that have made this, that's what's got to change, and we've got to change it. But quite frankly, beyond knowing that that's the problem, I don't know how we get there. And I really don't, to this day, if I think of the equivalent now, I don't know how we get there. You know, I'm not a mover and shaker in that sense. And really why I gave up, and I'll go on at too great a length, but I did a piece called Amends, and it was to make amends for all the, because I think if you make art, it has to be readable. The essential meaning has to be communicable. If it isn't, the idea that, oh, you thought it meant that. Oh, that's lovely. No, I can't, I just cannot buy into that. You know, yeah, one's viewing of art is very subjective, but if your intent, the image I use is if I'm pointing due south and you come to my show and you point due north when you talk to me about it, I've failed. I'd at least want you facing in the direction that I was looking. Not to control you, but so that, you know, it's a bit like if you wrote a novel, you wrote a sentence and the person thought you meant the exact opposite what you said. That's a failure of your use of the language. And it was to make amends for things said, things not said, things unclearly said. And everybody, all my friends, whenever I talk about this, they said, no, Dimitri. But I could, you know, and I'd stuck to it.
Was that at the Long Street space further down?
Yes, that was at the old space. Yeah, yes.
No, at the old space.
It was at the old space. Sorry, Long Street. Yes.
The Bloom Street.
Sorry, Bloom Street. No, I didn't recall doing any artworks at Bloom Street. You know. So yeah, and then in the same time, I did a lecture on artwork as artwork up in Pietermaritzburg. And what it consisted of basically was Jackie and Michael Oblowitz. They had a role. And I opened it, I was reading a Klaus Oldenburg poem. I had a lectern. And I opened this big, and it was the book with it in. And it's Klaus Oldenburg, about his poem. It's very long, and I only read about a page of it. But it starts off, I believe in an art of turds rising like cathedrals from sidewalks in the American cities. And I read this, and then I closed the book like this. And I had in my pocket here, I had a razor blade in wrapped up, so just a pointer sticking out. And I consulted with my friend Paul Ashton. I said, can I make a little cut in my forehead? You know, will it be, you know? He said, no, it'll just dribble a little blood. There are no major vessels. So I went, and it made a fantastic noise. It went, zzz. And then I went like this, which is vaguely Christ-like, but, you know, and I felt the blood going. And then Jackie and Vince, their instruction was they had to hit one another, slap, until they couldn't anymore. But my instruction to Michael was, you the boy, you're not allowed to give her a heel of your hand, just slaps, which they did for quite a long time. By the time they finished, I was blood from here, and I could feel it squidging in my sandals. And I had a white sort of t-shirty thing on and white jeans, pale cream jeans. So it was the most appalling catastrophe. And then when they stopped, Cliff Bestell turned the tape on, and unfortunately he fucked up because, well, he didn't, the tape recorder did, because it didn't come out loud enough. But it was Bob Dylan singing, there was a wicked messenger from Eli who had come with a song that did not speak, but only flattered. And my point was simply be real, especially for us, especially in South Africa. Be real if you can, if you're brave enough as an artist. So yeah, so the space, yeah, all those opportunities really. So where are we?
Let's get into now the directing, how you got into the directing side of things.
Yeah, we spoke about that a bit earlier. Yeah. There's a bit of personal history. How did I get to the space? Well, I had the connection because it was me who ran the gallery. I ran the gallery for the space while I was a lecturer at the art school, teaching photography. And those are mine, so you can imagine I had a bit of problem. Anyhow, and Neville Dubois, who was the professor, and this I must say because I've run into it often in my life. When he took me on, I said, Neville, I'm self-taught. I can only teach, as it were, what I know, which is very specific to me. It's what I do, and I can teach photography from that point of view, and I think it's sort of appropriate to art school students. And he said, oh, fine, because there was no photography, and we built the workshops. Gerrit helped me build the workshops, building, the tray, anyhow. And I'd been there a year and a half, and Neville started. Dimitri, couldn't you just run a course for the graphic design students? I mean, really, photography, it's essential. And I said, Neville, I came here on the basis that I know nothing. It would be a complete travesty for me to teach graphic design students advertising photography. It was a complete... One, I was ignorant, and two, I detested it as a photographer. It was zero. My only teaching lesson would be don't go into that if you want to be a photographer, And he persisted, and eventually and I said, okay, we can do, one term, and I said a project. I remember I said, make a record cover of your own design using photographs. And anybody who didn't quite know how to use a camera, I showed them how. I taught them nothing. But that wrecked me because you're lying. You are simply fabricating, you bullshitting, you don't have any right. If you have no knowledge and you don't value a subject, you have no right to introduce other people to it or try and tell them anything else. I don't think. That was certainly my view then. And it all culminated, and I ended up walking out in an absolute state. And you remember I said to you, I said I'd ended up, and what happened, I got diagnosed as a simple schizophrenic by a psychiatrist. And that's got a laugh or two. From other people. I might be many things, but I'm not a simple schizophrenic. It was based on the fact of thought blocking, which does occur in where you block thoughts. So that was his diagnosis. And he said, Dimitri, I think a little bit of electrical treatment will be very helpful. I remember I'd worked at Falkenberg Mental Hospital, so I knew what he was talking about. And because of the state I was in, I said, okay. And I had a course of 3. And the first one was fabulous because when I woke up, there was a silence like I've never experienced since or before in my head. It was completely silent.
You could just give us a brief thing on John's condom machine.
Yeah, because we didn't do many shows. Bee, can you remember? You seem to have quite a good memory. Can you remember, we didn't do many, I know we did a David Goldblatt show at the, what street? Long Street? No, which street?
134 Long Street, yeah.
Yeah.
No, 44 Long Street.
Yeah, but we didn't, we'd put Johnny's condom machine on, but there wasn't much, because it was just that
It was a
we lost the
space,
gallery. Yeah. The heart of it. Are we running?
We are running.
Okay, yeah, no, because at the new, the new space, Long Street space, the second space, we lost the gallery, and there were only a handful of shows. One was the David Goldblatt photography exhibition, and the other was John Nankin's. Does he still call it the condom machine?
Yes.
Just
done in South Africa now.
Yeah, it's just happened again apparently, and. What it was It was a Perspex box, and on top of the Perspex box was another Perspex box, and then draped around the top box were about, I don't know, 8 or 10 condoms on each face. And then there was a motor which pushed air up into the top box, and the condoms arose, and then the motor turned off and they collapsed. I think is that terminology right? Yes. and this was in the, well, just off the entrance to the theatre. Theatre was over there, and the restaurant was, and it was just a single room. And unfortunately, though, my primary memory of it is that the machinery broke down. An early example of art machinery breaking down. And and it eventually, it came. And part of this, part of that story, I knew Johnny from when he was a lot younger, and I met him through Shelley actually. And he had the sculpture in mind at art school, I think is the accurate story, and he was always talking about. In fact, I mean, the space, just to digress, the space was Johnny's way out of a complete personal impasse, wasn't it? Because he was in, I shouldn't, it's not for me to, if he's going to talk about himself, fine, but he was in a bad place. And he started off doing, building sets, incredibly wonderful hands, very inventive, very creative man. And the space was a protected enough environment for a person, and we could put up with his vagaries. I mean, he's become quite austere now, is my experience. I've only met him once. It was lovely. I met him and his partner, who's a big sculptor in South Africa. Yeah, but Johnny, and then eventually he started directing himself, didn't he, at the space? And now he works as a stage designer, doesn't he? Is that right?
Set construction. He works in film.
That whole and film. Yeah, but he's managed to keep himself standing. And he forgive me, Johnny, but I mean, he and I have which I'm not going to mention, but we knew one another in pretty parlous circumstances, and that was a long journey. And the space was very much involved in him, getting there. Anyhow, and my little role in this was to say, Johnny, make it, and we'll put it in this little room. And so he made it. And that was, and I didn't have to go to Brian and say, Brian, there's none of that. There was that sort of, maybe that's what you did best, Mr. Asbury. If you'd invited a person on site, then you expected them to make their contribution, and sometimes it must have been a bit painful.
Well, I just said yesterday that nobody ever listened to me in any case.
No, that's not true.
Done it in
Listen,
any case,
I'll give you an example. Fats DK, who's now quite a big macher, South African art world, as far as I understand. First attempt to write, she was she's sort of stage manager type person. First go, and she had this play that she was going to write. And she came to me and she said, Dimitri, will you direct my play? So I said, Fats, why are you asking me? What do I know about township life? And I won't choose, because you might not be able to use it, but sweet bugger all. She said, no, we'll teach you. Well, I'll take you to Guguletu, and, you'll know all you need to know. You can come, and you can start by coming to have lunch with my mum, which was quite, proper. Anyhow, so she wrote the script. And do you recall me saying, Brian, could you read the script, please? Because the sentences were about 2 miles long. You'd read the sentence, you crushed me. And I thought, what are we going to do with this? And I asked you to read it. And what your contribution was get Fats to read it to you, because I think you got her to do that. And it shows you how stupid one can be, because she read it, and with all the intonations and shapings and emphasis and the garrulousness of Fats and, in a way, black people, suddenly you had coherent dialogue in a style which, as English, didn't pass muster. I mean, it was, it just was formless. But when when you say, this is weird, and the words, English words, would have the emphasis at opposite ends or in the middle, which black people do, don't they? They speak a black version of English, definitely, and none of us do speak like that, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. So, and then we did the first South African with her, which I think was okay in the end. It wasn't. It was important symbolically. It got Fats going. She wrote other. You said you directed another play by her. She's made a whole career. Had she? That I figured. That I didn't. Yeah, that's not in my. Yeah. So anyhow, there you go. That was more traditional, though, was it?
Yeah,
I can't remember. Yeah. No, this was. I mean, the first South African was well. He was played by. What was his name?
Joe
Hartzenberg, who was mixed race.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the idea of the play was that he was a black guy who had been born white, which is a wonderful metaphor, because so many Afrikaners, when the baby's on the way, they live in mortal terror that they're going to get a sport from their less than pure father, which is the perfect, that's a wonderful, that's true, isn't it? I'm not exaggerating.
Based on, she was brought up in Langa with this guy who was called Royas.
That's right, redhead.
And
that's right.
he was the son
That's right.
of a German engineer and a
Black woman.
The
Yes.
German engineer had been sent back to England.
Yes, to Germany.
And
Yes,
the woman had been sent from the mines.
that's
to
right. It
Cape
was
Town
set
to
in.
hide,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
She gave birth to a white child.
Yeah, fabulous.
But that was the truth.
Yes,
Like,
and she
about something
it had actually happened. Yes, and she dramatized it, and its symbolic value was fabulous. It addressed to did it. You have such one is my theatre thing. You sit. I mean, certainly come on, as a director, you sit there, you think, oh, was that all right? And it would never end. It would be running for 3 weeks, and you'd go in to have another look, and think, oh my God, why did we do? That was me. And I remember trying to give notes, and people saying, Dimitri, it's all right. Leave it alone. Because the actors are buggers too. What was that play I did? It was after Magic Afternoon, and it was upstairs, promotion. Oh. Catastrophe. I don't know. Did you we found the play, or I chose the play? I can't remember.
We were in Fifth Street.
Were we?
We had a thing looming, and something had fallen through something else, as always.
Oh, right.
We were desperate for
For a play.
We had a small cast available.
That's right. We had about 3 people.
We knew we'd get the rights to that. So.
Oh, is that? I've forgotten that. All I remember was this play, Sea Anchor, is like a dragging anchor, isn't it? It's like a... And boy, it was just 3 actors. And, it was pretty I think you'd have had to be a genius director, actually, to get that to be... But I wasn't no genius director. And it just... And what happened was, and it's an abiding memory, is actors, when they're desperate, go for laughs, don't they? if they can get a giggle, at least it's a reaction. And the plane disappeared. Because if they could find some way, that's my recall. Isn't the one guy, what you mentioned his name earlier, the one actor, he was part of our company. Is he died? Is that, yeah. And Bill Flynn has gone too, hasn't he? Yeah. Charles died quite young though, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, he was part of it. So yeah, so that was my debut at the main stage.
The was actually earlier than that.
No,
So,
no,
yeah.
my
Upstairs, yeah.
yes, upstairs. No, the play that I have as a director, apart from Endgame, the one I remember with absolute clarity, and I loved it to bits, was I fell in love with the play. And I had all sorts, and if you remember, you know, what I was saying about the performance art pieces that I did, I dealt with it, I think, essentially like a piece of performance art. It was called Magic Afternoon. It had a woman and two men. Yes.
Yeah.
One of whom was Vince, and the other was that young lad,
Robin Smith.
Robin Smith, who wiped out the first vehicle I'd ever owned on dress rehearsal evening. He rolled it, my Beetle. Anyhow, that's an aside. And Magic Afternoon is a group of three youngsters and the afternoon descends into violence. That was the play. But it was the journey from two friends and a girlfriend and trouble. And what we did, it was done in one stripe. There was no interval. And I didn't like theatrical presentation. I'd never had to go to big theatres. We didn't have a big theatre. We had and this was an even tinier theatre. And the previous directing I'd done had been Jackie, with, you know, 3 people and a dog. So, and I didn't know anything much really. Also about this, you know, the whole, you're at the back, you know, you've got to reach the people at the back, and it does all sorts of things. I mean, I saw Michael Gambon, a friend of mine bought me Michael Gambon and that comic, what's his name? And they did Endgame. And I mean, I nearly left because we were up in the gods, you know, at some theatre in London, and they were pushing their voices to reach us. And the play, from my point of view, disappeared. Anyhow, side issue. So when the audience came in, we kept the doors closed. And when the audience came in, there was like ordinary lighting, you know, like and all the actors who were dressed absolutely like I am now, you know, there was no costume. I mean, they were in costume, but there was no costume about it. They were just 3 young people. And they were just, I mean, Dorian used to do her warm-ups. And then they would chat and talk in level talking. And the audience would file in, and, you know, you sort of ruffle. Said, I loved this. You know, sort of get comfortable, coats, bags, all the rest of it. No popcorn. We didn't do popcorn. Yeah, and then they'd be waiting, and the play had already started. You know, we had a sort of timing device. I don't know if Vince spoke about this, but the play had in fact already started, the written dialogue. And because the written dialogue was 3 youngsters hanging out, as you'd say now. It wasn't a term then. And what I did was, the lighting started at that level, and there was no actually stage lighting. And then through the course, I don't know how long it was, however long it was, an hour.
It was about
Yeah, the lighting did that. It just rose and rose, but you didn't notice it. And as the play progressed, and it got more and more argumentative and sexual and da-di-da, just kept climbing. And I remember that we had the young Robin's girlfriend was the stage man. And I said, you've got to only reach full bore at the critical moment. And it descends into what was very choreographed violence. But it was happening this far away from you. Because, you know, it was a flat floor, rakes. That was the stage. And the actors were where you are. And they were beating the tripe out of one another. But there was no actual violence. We didn't, you know, it was like a dance. And at the crucial moment when the lights go full, we had a hanging mirror. It was a sort of that shape. And Vince reels away and he goes bang into the mirror. And all the lights were like this out of the mirror. And people were, you know, they had got starey from what was happening. But what they didn't realize was it was getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And then at this absolute culmination, boom, no lights. Jimi Hendrix, Star Spangled Banner. And we played it full blast. And for me, I adored that. I did, because you can hear, I mean, was it well done? Ask the people who went, because I just loved being free, you know, the freedom to do it that way. Was it the right? I thought it was the right way. I loved that. And, you know, it was fantastic working there. And the actors were very generous. You know, they went in there first time, virtually, apart from Jackie, first time director, trusted me, listened to me, did it that way. I mean, hell, shit. You know, I mean, that takes balls. Oh, excuse my French, but I mean, it really does. As an actor, you know, doing everything wrong, in a way, because they weren't projecting, they weren't presenting, you know. Not an intellect, but my theory was trap them. You regard the audience as a kind of like skittering, get them so they, you know, they entrapped in what's going on. And that was the whole thing about hiding the lighting, hiding the fact that it was getting glarier and glarier. As it got more violent, the lighting got louder. So the whole thing, it wasn't as violent. It appeared a hell of a lot more violent because it was getting more in your face. So that's how I arrived at that.
I have to, you know, remember sorry to butt in you on that
Not
level.
at all.
But, you know, everywhere I go, I mean, all the drama schools, they teach actors, you know, the one goes wham and the other goes like this on their chest. So it's called a stage slap.
Oh,
and
no.
it just never bloody works. And that one...
yes, no, but it wouldn't have occurred to
the
me.
Space never did anything. And in plays I do, if somebody's got to slap somebody, I say slap them, and we teach them how to do it properly.
Oh, see, yeah.
And then we had the fight between Alpha, with Percy and Yvonne in Alpha Beta, in which, you know, Yvonne and Percy ended up covered in bruises. And on the second last night, Yvonne fractured a rib because it was so close they had to fight. And they did choreograph it, but it looked unbelievably real that close. And Magic Afternoon had set that tone because, you know, those slaps.
Yeah.
The audience used to absolutely shock in their seats. You know, watching
But it
from
was-
the lighting box. They just, you know...
Yeah, but you see, I mean, that's that interface, appearance and reality, you know. And if you, I mean, I think the thing with the lighting was that you weren't aware that it was getting brighter. So when the slap came in, it felt it was louder, harder. You know what I mean? And I think like when film really works, it does that. You know, I loved Endgame because I loved it because I think with great difficulty, I didn't have much to offer Ham. Billy and I worked quite well together, but it's a fantastic piece of work and it spoke to every dot and comma of the South African situation. Round and round. You know, the whole play starts, Klov! Klov! And you just, Master 7, whack! You know, and you didn't have to do it that well, did we? I mean, you know, it was all there. So, anyhow, what else? Yeah. The Bitter Tears of Petra van Kant, I'm not sure that I knew what I was doing. It had lots of fancy dresses. People came, but I'm not sure that I actually got it. I've got a feeling a lot of people came because Yvonne was in it. You know, I did find it hugely difficult if I hadn't, as it were, come to a piece or found a personal connection. I found it very difficult to have anything to offer. I mean, I felt I had all the tools with Endgame, simply because I adored it. However, I did tell you my story about the first time I saw a production of Endgame here. And I was mortified, absolutely mortified. Jesus, it was terrible. Ow! Because Beckett had approved it. I think he might even had something to do with it. And I went to it, and it was so funny. I thought, oh, what? Because it was done with the proper intonations. It was done with Irish intonations, with the right rhythms. And we did it in full South African. And we missed almost all the jokes. And I was, I think Brian, when we chatted on the phone the first time, he feels that it was fine. But I must say, I mean, I haven't been near the theatre since. And I think it was because I decided I don't speak English. I speak another brand. I speak South African. and it's probably, I mean, if you think of all the, Vince has managed, what's that guy who's almost a lord now? He writes books too. Actor.
Yeah, Richard
Anthony,
Tony
Tony
Sher.
Them, people, South Africans have done, so it's not true what I say, but it certainly was true for me. It never crossed my mind here to get into theatre at all. No, I mean, I didn't think I had anything to offer, and I didn't speak English.
Endgame really came into a period of time when, in South Africa, just after '76, when it was difficult to find anything to laugh at. And actually, it led us down a hill in certain terms, which ended us up in finding Lysistrata, or once called Lysistrata. But, because we needed something which people would actually come and see and get a message. And I learned that people slowly move away from something that's too real. And then you've got to get them back. And that's what we did with Lysistrata, is make them laugh and then regret laughing a bit later at things.
But also, I mean, yeah. The thing is, I mean, I would be absolutely, I mean, you did that Woody Allen thing? Yeah. What was it called?
Don't drink the water.
Don't drink the water. But you see, I mean, as in that sense, I've never considered myself as, I mean, despite working at the Space and doing it, as a theatre person, I would, I mean, I didn't, I had a good laugh at Don't Drink the Water, but I couldn't direct it because I'd have sweet, funny bugger all to offer in theatrical terms. Nothing. Zero. And that's not to put down Don't Drink the Water. That's, you just have a narrow compass. Or I do. I had in that regard.
Again, to go...
And interesting, I'm a woodwork tutor now.
But Don't Drink the Waters of the whole area were just because I wasn't a theatre person either. I was a photographer. And I got dumped in an area where we didn't have anybody to do anything. And Yvonne said, direct something. And I said, I can't direct. I sat in a room with Athel and watched him direct. I can't do that. And she said, well, you laugh a lot, very easily, direct a comedy. And then I had Flynn and Singer and all of that lot. Fantastic,
Yeah.
And they just did it. And then we made a lot of money. And actually our subsidy system was, what the butler saw, don't drink the water, love. That was what kept the rest going. So I was the sort of workman who did the funny things that kept the really important stuff going. And some of that really important stuff played to very few people in very small, but was nonetheless central to what the life of the space, the actual brains and blood of the space was done outside of those big productions. I loved doing them. I had a ball. But they weren't what the space was about. They were there to keep the space alive. That was all.
Yeah, and you either had something to offer to that.
Yeah.
Or you didn't. Yeah.
I mean, just aside, and I can't direct here. If I direct a comedy and nobody laughs.
You see, I might have had But I don't know. Do you live in England now? 13. Are you? And you're American.
Yes.
Okay. So, because I know there are English people who went to South Africa, often managed fine, very comfortable. I'm talking before, in our era. You know, you can think of a lot of English people who are absolutely fine there. Because, I think there's a sort of synonymity or whatever between racism and the class structure. So people are quite familiar with divisions. They're a bit more brutal in South Africa. But no, it's an enduring thing. Debbie, I feel, lives in England. Right? I'm not sure about you because I know. Yeah. No, you do. But I mean, I don't live in England. And I, to me, some of us should never have moved. That's and when the reason why I suppose even now when I talk about what we did at the space or those pieces, I mean it's as present to me in the imaginative sense as yesterday, because for the past 30 years I've been out of the bracket. Because when I left South Africa, I left my system of apprehension, and I still talk too much, am far too opinionated, shoot my mouth off, upset people, because South Africans generally are pretty opinionated and have an opinion on just about anything that moves. And if you want to live in England successfully, you have to learn a degree of kind of, yeah? Do you agree? Because if you don't, it's a tough call, And so in that sense, that time was, what it meant. Albeit, South Africa was what it was. Now, I must tell you a funny story about this from university days about South Africa. There's a guy called Roy Abramovitz, in the first year at UCT, and he's from PE, and he's Jewish. And every time we went to the movies, he took his identity card. And the reason was, every time we went to the movies, they asked for it. Which I think, because he was sallow, he's a properly dark person. I mean, in South African terms, he was a coloured, I mean, he never was a coloured. He was, I mean, his parents, I think, were from, wherever in Central Europe, and he had this very sallow skin. But he never went to the what's his name, because he'd gone and they wouldn't let him go in. And that was so much South Africa.
And somebody else said
What
it was
was?
like being
The
space, like being in a pressure cooker. And what happened inside that pressure cooker was that, we had these explosions. Billy Curry used to have his sort of one a year where he would suddenly explode. Peter Dirk Ace suddenly, boom, went and walked out on us, etc. And then you did. Now, actually what was happening is, in my hunt for somebody that would have an artistic vision for the space, finally you'd grown to that place, and that you were that person, and that was me. And I was actually sitting thinking, oh, thank God, I can finally give up and go back to being a photographer.
Me,
And I'll just be in the background and he can run the bloody place. And in the middle of that, suddenly, kaboom, everything exploded. I don't know whether you even want to talk about that period, but is there anything that...
It's not easy, because it was between, in a sense, you and I, and it involved Yvonne. And it was basically, Brian was setting up an exhibition of photographs, and it uses a hell of a lot of photographic paper. Are we on the same page? Right, hang on. I might be on the...
No.
So, and what I can't remember is how I came to think this, feel this. But my understanding was that the space was paying for the paper. And my take on it was, what did we get paid?
30 rand a week or something.
A week,
40,
yes.
and I think it had gone up to 40 at that
Yes,
stage. Yeah.
it got up to 40. You didn't get the raise.
No, I honestly don't remember.
Have you any idea what that means? Even then, jeez. And anyhow, it was very little. Now, I thought that Brian was getting the space to pay for it, and instead of going to Brian, now this you don't know. At the time, I was in big bracket, inverted commas, in therapy with a guy called Peter Lamley. I've never spoken about this in public before, and I'm going to do so now, because Peter Lamley is the reason I'm in Europe. Peter Lamley nearly cost me my life. And basically, in retrospect, and I think fully justified, he was a cult leader, right? In the guise of therapy, he had a group of people entirely, you remember, Dorian, me, entirely in his thrall. And I mean, for years, my therapy consisted in me going into his room and him saying, "So how are you?" And being the person I'm going to say, "I'm fine." And so I'd get out. You're not coming straight with me. On and on and on and on. Anyhow, and when this arose, this thing where I was convinced that you were being subsidized, your exhibition was being subsidized by the space, and I genuinely, did I check with anybody? Did I ask Moira? I think if I did speak to it was Moira, wasn't it? Yeah. It wasn't clear it was ambivalent, or Brian is going to pay it back, or something of that order. And then what Lamley said was, what you must do is call the whole space together, which I did. And that effectively, and then Yvonne came into a rehearsal, I think it was of the first South Africa or something, and said, "I will never work with you again," which she didn't. No, yes. Did you not know? No, she came in. It was quite dramatic. I mean, it was quite, she said, "I will never work." And the truth is, when we met at the theatre 30 years ago, Yvonne walked away. That was how upset she was. So now, were you unduly subsidized? I honestly don't know. Am I particularly bothered now? No. Do I need to know whether you were or you weren't? No. Because in retrospect, if I were governor of my own life, then I probably would have tried to do it differently or do it another way. So I think Mr. Lamley, who cost me everything nearly, had a hell of a lot to do with it. And that's not, I think there was something ambivalent about it, but yeah, and that's in effectively that was the end of me, wasn't it?
Well, you and Dorian then just left.
Yeah. But then,
South African.
you know, I once, there are two things. I don't often write. I told them about occlude, the only thing I've done for 30-something years. Yeah, Debbie was the safekeeper of occlude for a while, wasn't she? Yeah. No, I don't often write things, but one of the things I wrote relatively recently was, we tell ourselves stories, taking them to be truth. Shame. and I think it governs an enormous amount of. And a lifetime ago, I wrote a poem, and it's the last bit of it is a long poem, and the last bit of it is, I'm subject, not king of my own country, and the king of my country has a million laws and a million sub-laws and sub-clauses of sub-laws. So, and Lamley involved himself with that. So, and in a sense, yeah, I ended up in Greece because of Lamley, and I ended up in England because I nearly died of isolation there, despite being a, well, the Greeks they thought I was an Italian. They called me Orjimi because the Greek goes, because my name locates me in Crete. My family, although my family had left Crete to go to, what's it called? That Egyptian city on the top there. Alexandria. They are Alexandrian Greeks. In other words, they could have left Crete centuries before. So, anyhow. But yeah, so that I think my leaving space, this space, had a hell of a lot. You see, when I did homage to the South of Africa, Lamley, I invited him and he didn't come. He said, "Oh, I forgot." He's very brutal, very lethal man. That's why I have such faith in psychotherapy now.
Tell Beulah Levine that.
If you're going to go into psychotherapy, check out the therapist.
Yeah,
It
I
was
spent
very
a glorious
destructive.
4 days begging him, because he came to me when I said, "Would you run the whole place, run the company?" And he came in and said, "Yes, I'll do that, but I need Dorian to come in with me." And I kept saying to him, "This is not the right move. It's not going to work." Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He doesn't even remember this. When I came back from overseas, and you built the whole new space, with all of these people around, and you got them together and motivated them, and we then started running the company through that, and we had all of these wonderful people starting to work there, and that was the first time when we actually got a lot of black actors started coming in, and there was a whole central thing, and you developed a system whereby if anybody had any problems, there was a meeting immediately. Totty came in one day and said, "Charles Common is a boss agent." So bang, we were all sitting in the theatre, and off we went with this bloody thing. Charles and Totty, standing there. Charles, poor old Charles was sitting. "What is it? I saw you were having lunch with this guy who's a boss agent." And Charles said, "He's one of my best friends from school." And Charles was anything for a free meal.
And another beer.
But you see, it thrashed the whole thing out and was a wonderful system.
Yeah, well,
and so when that meeting came up about that, I actually remember Chimpy.
It was only marginally to do with that. It was a misunderstanding on my part, but it was.
Could have been something else.
Yeah. Yes, effectively. And I've lived with the fact that I'm not the king of my own country my whole life, and I'm old enough. I think when I did psychology, we did a course on the various therapies, and then after that, they did a thing about assessments of the effectiveness of therapies, and against time wins. So if you stay upright long enough, the outcome is better than any amount of therapy. So, enough said. If you get a nice therapist, they can hold your hand and guide it up. But if you've got a dysfunctional mind, I think you're a bit stuck with it. So, and I think, that's interesting. That's
it was at the time, and I remember very clearly. I always have. Oh. You've been one of the most valuable people in my life. as I said, I'm a limited brain, and constantly to be rubbing up against the amazing people that were in the space was such a challenge. I mean, Yvonne was a gigantic bloody challenge. Ethel was a gigantic challenge. And then I suddenly get all of you coming in there, and I constantly felt totally inadequate.
Yeah, but you know,
because
Brian,
around
can I say
there
something
was
to that? No, and this is pertinent to the whole thing about the space, and that is, I remember, I forget who it was, but I think in the theatre, the first order creativity is the mothers who sit down and write the play. That is making, right base level, no script, no play. Okay. Now, we were all makers, but second order makers. We were making the theatre after the people had written the plays. Okay. And that, I'm sorry, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's why, what your role, yeah, hang on a minute. There is another role. It's also a second order role. It isn't writing the script, but as an enabler, non-pareo. And I mean, Debbie's here, Bee knows. I think anybody who had anything to do with the space would agree with me that as a enabler, simply by having the idea, living with the chaos, not taking yourself like, you weren't a Führer. You had the capacity to say, I think you can do it, fuck off and do it. That is a gift. That is a gift, because most people in a boss role, they want a boss, man. Okay, I work across the road there, actually, this brand new building, and I got a classic case of exactly that. He makes everything difficult because he wants to be sort of in charge, and the reverse of that feels like, if people are, it's a kind of generosity, actually, to facilitate other people's. It's a bit like real teaching. Real teaching is not about the teacher. If it is, boy, have you got trouble. If you think about art schools, if you went to art school, but it's particularly pertinent in art school. I don't know what it's like in drama schools, but if you teach it, which I did for a short while, I mean, what you've got to do is say, okay, Deb's come, she's brought her first set of pictures. Where do we go? What are the indicators? Why don't you try this? Why don't you? For her, the fact that I took endless pictures of the same chair is of no consequence, because unless Debbie exhibits a similar, rather unfortunate bent, then it's no use to her. So you've got to be for Debbie. And by the same token, if you're going to start up a theatre and you want people to make shit and give their all, then you've got to have a kind of generosity. It hasn't got a name for it, but it is, isn't it? Wouldn't you say? Yeah. So, and that was a crucial, I don't think you could, I mean, yeah, no. And I'm not trying to, I'm not making that up. I really am not, because it's absolutely true.
It wouldn't happen without.
Yeah. And, you could have wanted, put it this way, yeah, or the space that happened wouldn't have happened. That's the point. You see, because, say, you were a guy, you were married to this great actress, and you knew, and she was the muse of a rather substantial South African playwright, put it mildly, and you wanted a theatre, you wanted to give them a venue. You could have done that, and then sort of thought, look what I've just done, and fucked it up. Because it would have been all about Brian Asbury. And what a great sort of, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not how you did it. That's not how you did it. Okay, so yes, it was pretty chaotic. And, we all had to live with the skin of less than a rank. But then it was free choice. I mean, if you can't manage on what we can pay you, sorry. I mean, you didn't Chile, and as far as I know, we were all pretty much on the same deal. So there was that kind of like, in a most literal, proper way, in the same boat, weren't we? We were all completely skinned. And then people like Debs, when you did you get any? You didn't get paid for the poster? No, neither did Cliff.
But we worked at the Cultural History Museum.
Yes, yeah. No, but what I'm saying is, but the kind of, because it was so straight, you come here because you want to be here, and I think, well, I also want you here because I think you can do stuff. I might be wrong, but I'm giving you the opportunity to try. And that bred amongst other people who weren't actually part of the space, an equivalent sort of, it was also an opportunity. The space, do a poster, do this, do that, whatever. So yeah, I think that was definitely part of it.
But Percy used to get paid. He absolutely insisted as a professional on being paid. Then he would come in the following week and give it back. But he said, it has to be there. And he actually paid tax on it.
Did he? Oh, wow.
So he was the biggest single donor to the space that was there.
Right. Oh, okay. I did, yeah, well, you
and
obviously
then you had
kept
people like
quiet
Chrissy
about it.
Besson, who was, also a major league actress. And that doesn't exist anymore, apparently, I'm told. John Nankin tells me regularly in South Africa, people now work for money and fame, and that's it. And they are not prepared to get together, though I have noticed signs around the periphery. People have sent me things, and there are theatre groups and artists getting together. Julia Clark, being John's daughter, now being really... Did you see she came to London? She did an exhibition. Did you see? Julia Clark. She had a...
So, yeah, I mean, it was just post-60s.
Yeah. But also,
Do you remember that show? Sorry, no. Yeah, no, the heart of that was, I mean, you have the previous context, about our impotence. And it was an opportunity for people, ostensibly artists, to respond to an atrocity, really. And, detention without trial, I mean, incarceration, and it wasn't just being kept in jail, it was, isolation. And it had no kind of, term to it. What they did was 90 days, they let you out the front door and then rearrested you and put you back in another night, let you out the door, rearrested you, put you back. So you never knew. You couldn't consult a lawyer. Okay, that's what was being done, and we all knew. Right? And why did, this is, to be honest, you see, why did I put on the show? Because I was a deeply thoughtful, radical activist? No, because I knew James Polly. I had a personal connection to who was there. This was somebody I knew. And for the first time, what did we do about 90 days detention? We went, oh, Christ, it's terrible, isn't it? Because, I mean, what were you to do? Right? So that was the basis of, and that's why there was a cruelty and a deliberate harshness about putting up all the names of the people invited to that show and leaving blank the people who didn't contribute. Because that's what we were always doing. And at least here, as an artist, along with it, so they would have had to arrest about, I don't know how many, Bee, do you reckon? There were a lot of people. There were a lot of people did put in pieces. Some of them were just pieces that they did anyhow, which was fine because their names were on them. And for them, that was probably quite scary. And that gives you a measure. If you put your latest bowl of flowers up as a response to the fact of detention, and that takes courage. It gives you a kind of image of how cowed we were, actually. True or false? True, I think. And then Leslie Decter, I was one of the few people. I mean, Trechikov, who made an absolute fortune making kitsch of a most awe-inspiring order. And he was world famous at that time, and his prints were everywhere in people's living rooms. Prints of sort of purple African women, and yes, turquoise people with big turbans.
They were in every furniture shop.
Yes. Anyhow, but now Leslie Decter, who, if you met him, was a commercial photographer. But when given the opportunity, and the reason I gave him an opportunity is because through Peter Weber, I sort of knew him. But enough thought of going around and asking all the photographers in my heart, I think, just quailed. But I did ask him, and he went like that. And that was the significance of it, because, as I said earlier, he would have paid. He could have paid. It was a real, I mean, we were talking about being paid and being skint. He wasn't skint. He lived in Clifton and he was doing very, very well, thank you. And South Africa wasn't hurting him at all, you know, and he wasn't the kind of person who was full of political views or anything like that. But when asked on a purely human level, he did this, he went to huge lengths. I don't know, 3, 4 Cibachrome, and in those days they cost 6 arms and a leg. It was a new tech. You remember the brilliant color prints? They were a bit kitsch, and forgive me, Leslie, you know, they weren't great pieces, but I thought it was a significant. Yeah, I always remember the fact that he and the other guy, I don't know who his name was, who pitched up with his abstract field painting and suddenly realized one thing. Can you remember who it was? That I've never forgotten. Because he suddenly thought, my work does not address this issue on any level at all. Which was true of a lot of the stuff that was being done, wasn't it? I must tell you one thing that we did do. It was only a handful of people. I don't know if Debbie was there, but one of the best works I ever did was we went down to Green Market Square, and we each had a masking tape about a yard long, about that long, and stuck to it was wool, you know, lengths of wool about that long. We just found some old wool, and about half of 3/4 of a meter long, right? There's a bank on Green Market Square, and we went to each corner and appropriated the building. And the guards came out and absolutely forced us to take them down. And I thought that was, because it was so sort of funny and representative of the whole world we lived in. I mean, it was a joke for Christ's sake. I mean, it was a serious art joke. We hereby appropriate. God's go. Take it down. Take it down. We'll get you arrested. So there you go. That's that's enough of me. Yeah. I love that. And then in a sense, I suppose, that was in a sense the spirit of most of we got, a lot of what we did was just to we were all trying bloody hard.